What is one memory that never fails to make you smile every time you think about it? My mom found out she had stage 4 lung cancer when I was 2 and passed away when I was 6. When she got diagnosed, she was given 6 months to live, so needless to say, she gave us lots of amazing memories and really lived in the moment. The one story I always tell when talking about my mom was how one day she let me and my older sister stay home, which was a big deal in 1st and 3rd grade already. We went to Bulk Barn and got every item we wanted. When we got home, we snuggled in my parents' bed, spread out what felt like a never-ending amount of bags of chocolate/candy, and watched Disney movies all afternoon. When my dad came home from work, he just jumped right in and joined us. It was right before she went into hospice and the last good day I remember her having before she passed, so the memory holds a special place in my heart. Sounds like your mom was awesome. About a year ago, was in a discount grocery store. I had about $20 left after bills and rent, so was having to carefully pick what to buy. In the end, after umming and ahhing for a couple of minutes over whether I could afford to spend $6 on coffee, I put it back on the shelf and went to the register. As I'm walking out OFD the shop, I hear a woman call after me, "Young man, you forgot this." I turn around and she thrusts the jar of coffee into my bag. I go to protest and she cuts me off saying, "I remember what it was like not having enough money and having to go without. You take that coffee and enjoy it, mate." The biggest smile on her face. She was like a beacon of light during one of my darkest times, and I always remember her. With every cup of coffee I can't help but smile, because now each cup reminds me there are truly good people in the world. This reminds me of a story. My son got pneumonia. When he was 5, he was in the hospital for 4 days and they finally sent us home with $400 worth of prescriptions. His Medicaid had gotten messed up somehow, and turns out he was uninsured. We were broke AF at the time, and had just paid the mortgage, so $400 wasn't in the cards. I had about $250 to my name. I drove around to different pharmacies trying to see if it was cheaper. About the 8th pharmacy I went to, the pharmacist said, "Let me check the price," went in the back and handed me the prescriptions and just smiled. I tried to ask how much they cost, and he just kept smiling. I'll never forget that guy. I'm a 6'3", 250-pound construction worker, and I cried all the way home. My daughter was born in July. The following fall she often would cry at night. I would wrap her in a blanket and take her for a walk. Moments after we got into the cool fall air, she would fall asleep, but I would make the walk last as long as I could. Now every fall when the first cool evening hits, I smile and often take a walk. Edit. She's now 38. Close bracket. Thinking about my cat, Cricket, and how he loved hanging out with me in my garage, like he was my assistant working on the car, or sat with me during rainstorms. He was so much fun. I love Cricket's name. Also, I love Cricket, he seems pretty great. Bike tours with Grandpa. He sure was the sun. I'm waiting for you/Grandpa to come and say back, quote, "Here comes the sun." When my friend got hit in the face with a piece of broccoli at a hibachi restaurant. This made me remember that for my birthday one year I went to a restaurant called Donver in Montreal with my sister and some friends. The wait staff is people who are blind, and you eat in the dark. My sister managed to throw a mushroom at me and hit me right in the middle of my forehead. Of course I threw one back, but in the dark I missed and could not tell where it went. About 5 minutes later we just hear, "There's something slimy on my chair," from someone who had just been seated. We about died laughing. Also being sung happy birthday in complete darkness takes all the awkwardness out of it. No one staring at you, and you don't have to look at anyone/anything. The first time my daughter spoke her intelligible word, she woke up in the morning and looking at me said, "Papa." The funny part is that my wife had, according to her, the perfect plan. She would say, repeatedly, to the baby, the word "Papa." Then, supposedly, when the baby would need anything she would call me, and not my wife. It worked until certain point. Now she's jealous that the first word was "Papa." But, when the baby wants something she calls for her mommy, most of the times. Lol, I like her plan. My favorite childhood memory is, and always will be, sitting at the kitchen table having a coffee with my mom. We would just sit and talk for hours about everything over a pot of coffee. Truthfully, every time I have a coffee I think of those times and smile. That probably contributes to my caffeine addiction. I need a coffee to get through my day has totally different meaning for me. That joyful thought always rights whatever wrong is going on. She lives several states away now and is getting older. I don't know how many coffee talks we have left, but I'll always have the ones we've already had. You can always start a tradition of phone and coffee pots. Both make coffee and sit and talk. I know it isn't the same, but sometimes making that time just to talk and ramble makes all the difference. I did arts and crafts, story time, etc. as a volunteer at the children's hospital. Definitely when my favorite kid found a bone marrow donor. They have a large golden bell at the front of the ward that kids ring when they finish chemotherapy. She hadn't finished yet, but she just went up to the bell and karate chopped it. I drunkenly signed up as a bone marrow donor last night. I secretly really hope it works out and I actually help someone. My mom would sing and dance in the kitchen every Sunday morning when I was growing up. Times were always tough and money was always tight, but my mom always made sure we were happy and healthy. One particular day, when I was 8, I was woken up by the sound of Gloria Gaynor's "I Will Survive" blasting through the house and my mom singing off key. As I walked to the kitchen, the smell of chorizo and eggs filled the air and there I saw her, my mom, who only a few days earlier looked so miserable with her life, was dancing her heart out with a spatula in hand. When she passed away 7 years later I cried every time I thought of her, except for this memory. This is the only memory that got me through her death. It not only makes me smile every time I think of it, but it's my favorite memory of all time, because I'm so lucky to remember her for who she was. Edit. I was given the Gold Award. Thank you so much, kind stranger. It's my first. And wow, this is getting a lot of upvotes too. Thank you all. The last afternoon I spent with my grandma. She was such a firecracker, always joking around and giving people the bird. We had a great time, just the two of us. She passed away in September 2019, about 2 months after her husband. I miss them both, but thinking about that last afternoon with her always makes me smile. That sounds so nice. My grandma passed away Tuesday, and I was unable to go tell her bye or anything because of the virus. It made the funeral very frustrating not being able to hug anyone. Edit. Thank you all for your support. I genuinely appreciate it. I got to spend an entire week staying with my grandmother once when I was a child. That week was the best, since I love my grandmother. We would scrapbook, sew, bake cookies, and do puzzles together. I was so happy to be able to spend time with her like that. She was my favorite person in the world. I loved my grandmother so much that when I was a little kid, what I wanted to be when I grew up was a grandmother. She's no longer alive, so I'm relearning how to sew during the quarantine. And I'm going to make a quilt with some of her old quilt blocks. That's so fantastic. What a great blanket that will be. One time my brother said something funny while I was eating cereal, and I had a huge mouthful of unchewed mini wheats and milk and I started to laugh. But then my sister said something funnier, and then I thought of the most epic funny thing to say, but I was trapped in the state of laughter / trying not to spit out or choke on my food, which actually made me laugh even harder because of the situation I was in. Then my brother looks at me like, WTF is wrong with you? And I just point at him, and then my sister, and then myself, and it was so stupid, and I just fell to the floor crying with laughter. I can almost see you crying and rolling around still crunching. Made me chuckle, thanks. Any memory with my grandpa? Well, he technically isn't my real grandpa, but he's who I grew up with my whole life. The man was hardworking, loving, funny, and every positive aspect you'd ever want in a grandpa. But there's one memory that stands out. 6 years ago, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, colon cancer, and Alzheimer's. They weren't diagnosed together, but he took those diseases to the grave. It was too much for him to be awake during all of it, so they medically induced a coma that he never woke up from. Throughout all of it, he never moved a muscle. The quiet sounds of his breathing were all we heard. At one point, my sister was by his side in tears, like the rest of us. Out of nowhere, he reached up with his arm and gave my sister a hug. No one else got any actions from him, not even my grandma. It's a memory none of us will forget, especially not my sister. He died on March 4th, 2014, and our family gets together for ice cream on that date, along with his birthday, to celebrate his life. He didn't deserve the pain he went through one bit, but I have no doubt that his loved ones greeted him with a smile when it was all over. I love you, Grandpa. Edit. Wow. Almost 1,000 upvotes. Thanks for all the support. I wasn't even expecting it. I wanted to smile, not cry. Also, sorry for your loss. Your grandpa seems like an incredible person. I've told this story on here before, but I used to work for a landscaping company cutting grass in industrial parks. One day I was cutting a huge piece of lawn after a light rain and stirred up a bunch of bugs. Some swallows must have noticed and went on a sort of feeding frenzy all around me for like 1/2 hour. I would be riding along and a bird would swoop what felt like inches from my head and then spiral all around to catch more bugs. After watching them for a minute or so, I knew they wouldn't crash into me, so it was like being given a private air show. They called you the Swallow Man. My first time coming home from college, I was worried my dog would forget me while I was gone. But when I walked through the door, she lost her shit. I've never felt so loved and relieved. Dogs never forget. Me and my friends sitting around talking and laughing for one of the last times before university ended, and we all got split up. My dad was retired military. When I was pregnant with my son, he came to stay at my house near my due date. Things start happening and off we go to the hospital. My husband driving me in his car, and my brother and dad following in their car. I had a truly horrible and very long contraction right before we got to the hospital. So my husband calls my dad to tell him the new plan. He was going to grab a wheelchair for me, and then my dad was going to take me in to get admitted, while the other two parked the cars. So we get out of the cars, and I'm sobbing, leaning on my dad, while waiting for the wheelchair. He asks me if I'm okay, I think just as a reflex. Obviously I say no. I can barely focus through the pain, and this is not a light, delicate tear slowly rolling down my cheek situation. So the wheelchair comes, and I get in it. My dad starts pushing and hauls us through the doors, where I see there is a line of people waiting to check in at the front desk. Dad doesn't even attempt to wait in line. He goes directly to the side of the desk as fast as he can push my fully pregnant self. He doesn't look like he's planning on stopping for the little old lady who's being helped. So I put my feet out to stop the wheelchair and prevent her from being hit. Luckily she doesn't take very long, and my dad soon pushes me up a little further to talk to the woman behind the desk. Hi, yeah, my daughter is in labor. She needs to be checked in right away. Okay sir, we can do that. We just need some ID from you. Now at this point, he's behind me, so I can't see him, but the contraction is finally starting to subside, so I'm calming down a little bit. But I can hear the disgust dripping from his voice when he says, "She's about to have a baby and you're worried about my ID." She tells him yes, she doesn't need anything from me, but she does need to make a quick ID sticker for him. So logically the next thing he says is, "Okay fine, here's my driver's license, military ID, credit cards. What else do you need? Can we go now?" While emptying his entire wallet and tossing random cards on the desk. My dad was a career military man, and I have rarely seen him lose his cool. But the memory of him losing his shit and trying to help while I was in pain always makes me smile. He died recently, and I really miss him. I'm sorry for your loss. When my sister was on my iPad, we were FaceTiming. My baby brother came into my room, saw my sister, and kissed my iPad. I didn't read this right and thought that your baby brother loves your iPad more than your sister. My brother and I went to the dollar store one day and went through every aisle and put anything in the cart that we thought was cool. We kinda messed around and ended up putting away 80% of it. But I don't hang out one-on-one with him much, so it made me happy. Just ask him to go out for some beers or food and tell him you miss hanging around as brothers. Brothers will make an effort to make that happen. The last time I saw my great-grandma Claudine, she was 98 and had horrible dementia. She didn't recognize my grandmother, her daughter, and it was honestly very sad. We were going to her house because my papa, her husband, died and we needed to go to his funeral. Before we left we got a car wash and one of the guys there gave us a red carnation. It was a weird promotion or something I think. But after a 10+ hour drive we made it to her house. I rushed inside and overheard my grandma begging my great-grandma to remember her because my grandma had recently been diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer. She kicked its ass and beat it. I gave her a second and knocked, then walked in. The very first thing my great-grandma said when she saw me was, "Is that my beautiful my name?" I nearly cried just from that. My grandma was super happy she remembered me, but sad she didn't remember her and decided I should spend time with her alone. She went off to go get some food I think, but I don't really know. So it was just me and my grandma. We chatted for a while and the inevitable question finally came up. Me, who was that woman in here earlier? That's your daughter, Grandma? Oh really? Why does her hair look so weird? Oh, it's a wig. She is bald now. I couldn't bring myself to tell her daughter had cancer, even thought she wouldn't remember. She giggled a bit then attempted to pull me in and said I'm gonna steal her wig. I laughed. She couldn't walk or lift her own arms on her own, let alone snatch a wig right off of my grandmother's head. After about an hour my tummy started to grumble, so I called my grandma back in and went to the kitchen for some potatoes. After maybe 5 minutes I heard my grandma scream. I was afraid my great-grandma finally had died and rushed in, but it wasn't that at all. My great-grandma did it. She ripped the wig right off of my grandma's head. She told her to come close to whisper a secret, and with all her might snatched it. She went on to live in a care home, and got into many more antics, and would call once a week begging me to steal her away, and start a traveling band. Edit. Holy crap, wow. I went to sleep and woke up with all of these amazing messages and awards. Thank you all so much for enjoying. I was thinking of posting something similar, but this is awesome. My grandmother had very bad dementia as well. She passed a few years ago at 93. Her husband, my dad's father, was a WWI vet and survived some seriously horrific things as they were in the USSR. I was born there as well. He passed when I was about 5 years old, on his lap, due to a stroke. Decades later, I was out of town, in college, and my parents couldn't care for her anymore due to constant supervision and medical needs. My father moved hell and earth to get her to the top of the list of one of the best care facilities in Los Angeles. Towards the end, she couldn't remember who he was very well, let alone his wife, who was there just about every single day, taking care of her mother-in-law, while my dad went to work to pay for the privilege of us being alive and healthy. We are immigrants from Eastern Europe, USSR at the time, and you can't just give up on family. I went to visit her with my dad for the first time in almost a year, and I was nervous. I felt horrible for not seeing her more often as she practically raised me through grade school. I was afraid she wouldn't remember me. As soon as I walked in, I saw her face light up, and she said my name, and hugged me, and kissed me on the cheek. She introduced me to everyone there, staff and patients. My dad took a picture of me and her outside, in the garden that afternoon. I don't consider myself to be photogenic, so I wasn't a fan. A year or so later she passed at that facility. A few days after the service, my mom asked me if I wanted to have something that belongs to my grandmother. It was a framed photo, that same photo of that day in the garden, with her face lit up and smiling ear to ear, and me with my standard half smile smirk, my arm around her, and her gripping my hand. The frame had a title, Nana and Me, and the nurse told us that was on her bedside table since that day next to a picture of her husband and my sister. I keep that picture in its frame on my nightstand next to my stuff for when I get ready in the mornings. I've done a lot of bad things in my life, but every day I see that picture I can't help but remember how good it felt. That she remembered me and thought the world of me despite life's best efforts to erode all her memories. Edit. Wow. Definitely didn't expect so much reaction for a comment written at 2:30 AM. Thank you all for the kind words and thanks for the silver. I guess I got my first award on a meaningful post.